My name is Simon and this is how to build a racing car. This is a race report from the second round of the New South Wales Formula V Championship, which was held at Wakefield Park Raceway. Since the previous round I had spent a huge amount of time improving the front end of the car. I'd stripped it down, fixed some little issues and rebuilt it all. I got to use the wheel alignment bars which I'd just built to get a good baseline for the weekend. I had a freshly dynoed engine courtesy of CGR Performance, and I had replaced the rear brake calipers and all of the brake pads with some high performance racing ones. With all of this done, I was hoping to get a modest improvement since the club round at the start of the year, and the car did feel a little bit better on Friday. I had to dial myself into the new brakes. Frankly, the previous set were pretty rubbish. I was only able to lock a wheel if I did something really silly like turning out the brakes or anything like that. These new pads were pretty sensitive, and honestly, I only really felt like I was getting on top of them towards the end of the weekend, but once I did, it was a massive improvement. Most of the changes I've made though were only to rectify problems. There are some changes planned for the next brake period which should improve the car's balance. Qualifying on Saturday morning only saw me achieve 10th out of 18 drivers, a full 2 seconds off the pole sitter's lap time. The state championship is in full swing and most of the really fast guys were here for this event. This was a good measure of where I stand right now. I made an average getaway at the start of race 1. Though you can't see it, I end up side by side with Simon Duffy on my right. We headed into turn 2 with me on the outside. I managed to hold on and get ahead for the run up the hill. Soon I had John McDonald past me. We had a good race at the start of the year at the club round and it looked like we were heading for another fight here. I caught some lap traffic heading into the fishhook which separated us slightly, but I managed to come back and pass him onto the main straight. He was always then able to get back by me though by towing me down the main straight and passing me into turn 2. I decided to conserve and hold station until closer to the end of the race, since it was going to be quite a long one, planning to attack just before the end. I was just a little bit too far back though and was unable to make it work. Ultimately I finished the race in 9th. Race 2 I didn't have such a bad start, but Lee on my left had an absolute blinder, shooting ahead towards turn 2. I was able to get back by into the fishhook, but there was already a gap forming to the cars in front. I made a bit of an error of judgment here. I had thought that it was just James in the blue Jacer behind me. He was one of the guys 2 seconds a lap quicker than me and had an unfortunate DNF in the previous race, so was storming back through the field. In my mirrors I saw him and the red car, which I thought was Lee, several car lengths behind him, so I decided to let him through with no fuss. I hadn't seen that there were actually 2 red cars with Lee right behind James. He promptly followed him through. I was much quicker than Lee around the top end of the circuit where it's tight and twisty. After a couple of laps I was able to get back by into the fishhook. Simon Duffy got by into turn 2 a little while later and I was unable to regain that position. Lee was eventually able to get back by me into the final corner. This separated us from Simon, but we had a pretty decent battle as the race continued. Eventually I was able to take the checkered flag just ahead of him to take 9th once again. Race 3 and again Lee made a quick getaway. We took different lines through turn 2 and I was able to get alongside him heading up the hill. I couldn't help but recall the last time we had been in this position and what the outcome was on that occasion. This time I kept the car on the track and got back in front. I was able to get up behind and then alongside Simon Duffy heading down the main straight for the first time. We headed towards turn 2 side by side with me just edging out in front. Now I had to think a bit strategically. We both had Stephen Butcher coming up behind us and he was almost a second lap faster than I had been until this point in the weekend. I wanted to stay ahead of Simon, but I knew that I couldn't hold off Stephen. Simon was a fair bit quicker than me in clean air, so I couldn't let him in front if I wanted to hold on to my current position. I decided to yield to Stephen through turn 1 and try and use him to turn me away from Simon Duffy. From the outside this race would have looked like the easiest from the weekend. I drove around without doing any overtaking for 15 laps and just finished the race. From inside the cockpit though, it was a real battle. With the combination of the tow from Stephen, my car experienced less drag on the straight when I was behind his, so I was slightly faster, and me being able to follow a faster driver and learn from it, I was now driving quicker than I had driven all weekend. It took a huge amount of effort, both mentally and physically, to keep this up. Simon Duffy was large in my mirrors the whole race, so I knew that any mistake would cost me that position. It was a real battle, even if it just looked like we held our positions all race. The race eventually finished, and though I had only achieved 8th place, I felt like I really had to fight for and earn it. As a side note, I wore a heart rate monitor during these races this weekend to see how hard I was working behind the wheel, and the results were quite interesting. In all 3 races my heart rate peaked at about 180 BPM, which is about as high as I can sustain for more than a short period of time. The intensity of the race can also be seen. In the first race I settled into a groove fighting John, in the second I was trying to take and maintain the position from Lee, and the third I was pushing as hard as I could to keep my position the whole race, and you can see how the battle progresses by my heart rate. I was working so hard in the third race that my heart rate was just following the track, steadily increasing in the twisty half and slightly going down in the straighter half. As a comparison, this is how a typical mountain bike ride looks for me. I'm maintaining a similarly high heart rate but for a longer period of time. This is an interesting point of comparison if you've not driven a racing car or a kart at high speed. It can be quite hard to understand how it could be so physically taxing. A Formula V can corner and brake producing around 1.5 Gs, meaning that a driver is subjected not only to their own weight downwards, but 1.5 times their weight forwards or to the side, and the direction can change very rapidly from one moment to the next. Bumps and ripple strips produce violent impacts on the car that get transferred directly to the driver. In addition, the force required to turn the wheel or push the brake pedal isn't insignificant either. When cornering, I've calculated each hand has to put around 3 kilos of load into the wheel, one up and one down. Braking takes around 70 kilos of load, which is just more than my body mass. You can see that the driver is doing a huge amount of work behind the wheel. Anyway, that was a slight diversion, but I found it quite interesting and hopefully you did too. There are 2 weeks now until the next round at Sydney Motorsport Park, and I'm hoping to have some upgrades on the car, which I'll be sure to show you. Hopefully they will do something to improve the handling of the car. One last thing, the first Patreon goal has been reached. I'll be releasing the new design drawings for the bodywork plug in the near future, so if you want to support this project or the design release, feel free to head over there. Anyway, hopefully I'll see you on the next one.